The fluorescent lights of the 37th floor conference room buzzed like insects trapped in amber.
Thank you.
Maya Renee Cross sat alone at the head of a mahogany table built to
Thank
seat
you.
20, her fingers tracing the grain of wood that cost more per square foot than most Americans earned in a month. The acquisition documents lay spread before her like tarot cards predicting a future only she could see. $2,400,000,000. The number meant nothing anymore. It was just ink on paper, electrons in a database, the mechanical click of her signature transforming one reality into another. The lawyer, a pale man named Henderson, no relation to the teacher she'd meet 18 hours later, slid the final page across the polished surface. His Rolex caught the light, fractured it into rainbows that died on the contract's face. Ms. Cross, once you sign this, the acquisition is complete. Sky Vanguard Airways becomes a wholly owned subsidiary of Cross Capital Partners. The press release is scheduled for Monday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, when markets open. Maya's pen hovered. She thought about her father, about Captain Elijah Cross and the way his hands had trembled the last time she saw him alive, summer of 1998, when she was 13 and believed pilots were untouchable gods. He'd come home early from a flight, still in uniform, and locked himself in the bedroom. She'd pressed her ear to the door and heard him crying. A grown man, a captain, weeping like something inside him had shattered beyond repair. 3 days later, he was dead. The funeral director had done his best, but Maya could still see the rope burns on her father's neck when they let her say goodbye. The pen touched paper. Her signature was a slash, a wound, a declaration of war. Delay the press release. Henderson's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. Ma'am, the SEC requires... I'm aware of what the SEC requires. Delay at 72 hours. I want to audit operations first, personally. That's highly irregular. The stock is mine now. All 78% of voting shares. I can set it on fire if I want. Delay the announcement. Henderson closed his folder, defeated. The meeting dissolved. Maya stayed in her chair, watching Manhattan's lights through floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere below, in those rivers of traffic and humanity, people were living their small, safe lives. They would board planes tomorrow, trust strangers with their lives, never knowing the rot that festered in the cockpit. Her phone vibrated. A text from her assistant. Car is ready, JFK in 90 minutes, flight 902 confirmed. Maya stood, grabbed her bag, an $8,000 Hermes backpack so worn it looked like a college student's cast-off, and walked toward the elevator. She caught her reflection in the chrome doors. 40 years old, 5'9", skin the color of Tennessee whiskey, hair twisted into natural coils she'd stopped straightening after her father died. She wore a Loro Piana cashmere hoodie that cost $850, but looked like something from a clearance rack, and Brunello Cucinelli sneakers that had seen enough Manhattan sidewalks to pass for discount store throwaways. Perfect. The elevator descended. Maya closed her eyes and let gravity pull her toward the reckoning. JFK Airport's Terminal 1 smelled like burnt coffee and broken promises. Maya arrived at 6:30 Sunday morning, when the building was half empty, populated mostly by red-eye refugees and ambitious travelers chasing European business hours. She moved through the automatic doors carrying only the backpack and a boarding pass she'd printed at home. The e-ticket code glowed on her phone screen. 1A, Diamond Suite. Gate B7 sat at the end of a long corridor lined with advertisements for watches nobody could afford, and vacations nobody had time to take. The gate agent behind the counter was a woman in her mid-40s, blonde hair pulled into a bob so tight it looked painful, pearl earrings that screamed middle management. Her name tag read Diane Pemberton. Maya approached, handed over her boarding pass, Diane scanned it. Her expression shifted. A microaggression so small it would be invisible to anyone who hadn't spent a lifetime cataloging them. Her smile went from professional to suspicious in the space between heartbeats. "Ma'am, this shows Diamond Suite, Seat 1A. Are you sure this is your ticket?" The emphasis on sure was a knife wrapped in velvet. "Yes, I booked it yesterday." Diane's fingers danced across her keyboard, each keystroke an accusation. "Last-minute bookings that expensive usually come through corporate travel departments. Can I see the credit card you used to purchase this?" Maya produced her American Express Centurion card. Black titanium, no name visible on the front, just the embossed silhouette of a Roman soldier. Diane held it up to the light as if checking for counterfeiting, then swiped it through a reader that beeped green. Still not satisfied, Diane picked up her desk phone and turned slightly away. But her stage whisper carried across the empty gate area like a shout in a cathedral. "Brad, I need a supervisor at B7. We might have a fraud situation." Maya said nothing. She'd learned long ago that silence was a weapon, that the space where a defensive response should be often revealed more about the accuser than any argument could. A man in a navy blazer arrived, Brad the supervisor, 50-something, with the weary eyes of someone who'd spent too many years explaining policy to angry travelers. He studied the computer screen, studied Maya, studied the screen again. "The charge cleared. Let her board." Diane's jaw tightened, but she printed a new boarding pass with the kind of aggressive key punching that suggested she was imagining Maya's face under her fingers. "Gate closes in 5 minutes. Don't be late." Maya took the paper, folded it precisely in half, and walked toward the jet bridge. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel Diane's eyes boring into her spine, could hear the silent question that hung in the air like airport announcements. How does someone like her afford a seat like that? The answer was simple. She owned the airline. She owned Diane's job, Diane's pension, Diane's future. But Diane didn't know that yet. Nobody did, and Maya intended to keep it that way until she'd seen exactly how deep the infection ran. The Boeing 777-300ER sat at the gate like a sleeping dragon, its fuselage gleaming under terminal lights. Maya showed her boarding pass to the flight attendant stationed at the aircraft door. A woman in her early 50s with graying hair twisted into a bun so severe it looked like it was causing a headache, and a name tag that read Vanessa Whitmore. Vanessa scanned the barcode. Her eyes flicked from the screen to Maya's face, then down to Maya's worn sneakers and hoodie. The smile that had greeted the businessman in front of Maya vanished. "Sweetheart, economy boards from the back entrance. This is first class only." The condescension in Sweetheart was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Maya pointed to the boarding pass in Vanessa's hand. "Seat 1A, Diamond Suite." Vanessa squinted at the paper as if the ink might rearrange itself under scrutiny. "Well, system errors happen with online bookings. Let me verify this with the captain. One moment." She turned and walked toward the cockpit, her low heels clicking against the galley floor. The door was open, a violation of post-9/11 protocol, but Maya filed that detail away for later, and Vanessa leaned inside, her whisper carrying through the quiet first-class cabin. "Captain Kane, that girl in the hoodie claims she has 1A. A male voice responded, deep and authoritative in the way men who'd spent careers giving orders had perfected. "Girl? How old? Maybe 30s? Looks like she rolled out of a college dorm. Run her name against the no-fly list. Something feels off." Maya felt her pulse slow, felt the familiar ice crystallize in her veins. This was the moment, this was always the moment, when competence met prejudice and prejudice won because it wore a uniform and spoke with the unearned confidence of institutional authority. Vanessa returned, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "I'll need to verify your identity. Can I see your driver's license?" Maya produced it. Vanessa studied the photo, studied Maya's face, studied the photo again. She walked back to the galley computer and typed for what felt like a full minute. Finally, with the air of someone forced to admit defeat in a game she'd been certain she was winning, she gestured toward the cabin. "Seat 1A is on your right, first suite." Maya moved past her, backpack slung over one shoulder, and found her seat. The diamond suite lived up to its name. A private pod with a door, a lie-flat bed, a 24-inch entertainment screen, and enough leather to upholster a small car. She sat down, pulled out her rose-gold MacBook Pro, monogrammed MRC in letters too small for casual observation, and opened the Sky Vanguard Airways administrative portal. The password they'd given her during the acquisition due diligence worked. She was in. Around her, the first-class cabin slowly filled. A hedge fund manager in seat 2A already on his phone barking orders to some underling in a time zone where Monday had already arrived. An actress in 1F. Maya recognized her from a Netflix series her assistant had recommended, hiding behind oversized sunglasses despite the dim cabin lighting. An elderly couple in 2C and 2D, holding hands like teenagers off to celebrate some anniversary that had survived the erosion of decades. Normal people. Rich people, yes, but still people. None of them looked at Maya twice. None of them questioned whether she belonged. Until the captain emerged. Captain Victor Sterling Kane stepped out of the cockpit like a man walking onto a stage he'd built himself. 55 years old, silver hair that looked professionally styled, jawline that suggested regular gym attendance and good genetics. His uniform was immaculate. 4 gold stripes on each shoulder, wings pinned above his heart, shoes polished to mirrors. He scanned the first-class cabin with the proprietary gaze of a landowner surveying his estate. His eyes landed on Maya, stopped, froze. She watched him in her peripheral vision, her fingers still moving across the keyboard, typing nothing, waiting. He walked to the galley where Vanessa was arranging champagne flutes on a tray. His voice was low, but the acoustics of the 777's cabin carried it like a secret whispered in a cathedral. How did she get the chairman's seat? Vanessa glanced at Maya, then back to Kane. "Computer glitch, Captain. Probably a frequent flyer algorithm error. You know how the system sometimes auto-upgrades based on, she doesn't look like our usual diamond clientele." There it was. The original sin. The assumption dressed up as observation. Bias masquerading as security protocol. Maya's fingers stilled on the keyboard. She didn't look up, didn't react, just listened, cataloged. Let them dig their graves one shovelful at a time. Kane approached her pod. She could see his reflection in her laptop screen, see the way he positioned himself to loom over her seat, using his height and uniform as weapons of intimidation. "Miss, I need to see your ID and the credit card used for this booking." Maya saved her work, a spreadsheet of Kane's personnel file she'd pulled from the admin system, and looked up, met his eyes, held them. "Why?" The question was a hand grenade with the pin pulled. Kane's jaw tightened. "This is a premium cabin. We have protocols." "FAA regulation number for this protocol?" His face began to flush, a tide of red creeping up from his collar. "My aircraft, my rules." Maya felt something shift in her chest, some tectonic plate of patience grinding against the bedrock of her father's memory. She thought about Elijah Cross, about how many times he'd stood in a cockpit and heard those same words from men who looked like Kane. My aircraft, my rules, as if the laws of physics and federal aviation regulations bent to personal authority. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, navigating to her messages with deliberate slowness. Typed a text to David Park, her CFO. "Activate Shadow Protocol. Do not intervene. I want full documentation." His reply came in seconds. "Confirmed. Legal team on standby." Maya looked back at Kane. "I don't have to show you anything, but since you asked nicely." She produced her driver's license and the Centurion card. Kane examined them with the skepticism of a border guard in a war zone. He turned the license over, held it up to the overhead light, bent it slightly to check the hologram. The credit card got similar treatment. Finally, he handed them back. "Ma'am, this seat is reserved for a VIP passenger. Senator Hartwell's son is currently on standby for first class, and we have a responsibility to our most valued customers. I paid $18,400 for this ticket 16 hours ago. I have my boarding pass. I have my ID. I'm not moving." The cabin went quiet. The hedge fund manager lowered his Wall Street Journal. The actress removed her sunglasses and pulled out her phone, sensing drama with the instinct of someone who'd made a career performing it. Kane's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "You have 60 seconds to voluntarily relocate to seat 42B in economy class, or I will call Port Authority Police and have you removed from this aircraft." Maya looked at him, really looked, saw the entitlement carved into every line of his face, the certainty that his authority was absolute and unquestionable. Saw her father in the shadows behind him, a ghost still waiting for justice. She stood. Not in surrender, but in strategic retreat. There would be a time for revelation, for the unmasking, for the reckoning that would burn through this airplane like wildfire through drought-dead timber. But not yet. First, she needed to see the full architecture of their contempt, needed to document every beam and support column of the system that had killed her father. "I'll take 42B. Kane's shoulders relaxed. He'd won. Or thought he had. Maya grabbed her backpack. Before she stepped out of the pod, she turned back to face him, close enough that only he could hear her next words. "I'll remember this moment, Captain Kane, every second of it, and I promise you'll remember it too." Kane laughed, actually laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Are you threatening a member of the flight crew? I can have you arrested for that." Maya didn't answer. She walked. The journey from first class to seat 42B was a procession through the layers of hell Dante never wrote about. Through business class, where passengers in expensive suits looked up from their laptops and champagne, eyes following her like spectators at an execution. Through premium economy, where families with carefully budgeted upgrades whispered behind their hands. And finally, into economy proper, where 200 souls sat in seats designed by people who'd clearly never spent 6 hours in one. Seat 42B was exactly what Kane had promised. A middle seat in the last row, squeezed between a man eating a tuna fish sandwich and a woman trying to soothe a crying 8-month-old. The man was 70-ish, white, with kind eyes and a Wisconsin Badgers t-shirt. The woman was 30-something, black, with exhaustion etched into her face like wood grain. Maya squeezed past them, her knees immediately jamming against the seat in front of her. The tray table was broken, stuck at a 45-degree angle. The seat cushion had a mysterious stain shaped like South America. The overhead air vent was stuck closed, and the temperature in the rear cabin hovered somewhere around 84 degrees. The man with the sandwich looked over. "You okay, miss? Saw you come from up front. That's a long walk." His name, she'd learn later, was Thomas Henderson, retired middle school history teacher, widowed, flying to London to visit his daughter who'd married a Brit and given him 3 grandchildren he saw twice a year if he was lucky. Maya managed to smile. "Better view back here. You see who's really running things?" Henderson chuckled. "That's one way to look at it. You want half this sandwich? I think they forgot to load the meal service. Been sitting here 30 minutes and nobody's even offered water." The gesture, this stranger offering to share his meager food with someone he'd never met, hit Maya harder than Kane's contempt had. This was the airline's real clientele, not the champagne-swilling hedge fund managers in 2A, not the Instagram influencers in first class. These people, The ones who saved for months to afford a ticket, who packed sandwiches because they couldn't afford airport food, who sat in cramped seats and broken air conditioning and still had the grace to share what little they had. No thank you, Mr. Henderson, but I promise you the meal service is going to improve very soon. Henderson raised his eyebrows but didn't press. The woman with the baby glanced over, offered a tired smile. I'm Aisha. Sorry if Malachi keeps you up. He hates flying. Maya, and don't worry about it. Babies cry. It's what they do. The cabin door closed with the pressurized hiss of a tomb ceiling. Maya pulled out her laptop again, connected to the onboard Wi-Fi. $29 for 6 hours, she noted with disgust, and logged back into the Sky Vanguard administrative system. She had work to do. Captain Victor Sterling Kane's personnel file was a masterpiece of institutional protection. 28 years with Sky Vanguard Airways. $920,000 in total annual compensation. Base salary, per diem, stock options, pension contributions. FAA type ratings in Boeing 737, 757, 767, and 777. 0 failed check rides, 0 incidents. A perfect record, until you looked closer. Maya scrolled through the HR notes, the complaints section that should have been a red flag forest, but instead read like a whitewash manual. 17 separate complaints filed against Kane over the past decade. Sexual harassment from 3 female flight attendants. Racial discrimination from 2 pilots of color. Hostile work environment from 6 gate agents and ground crew. Every single complaint had been dismissed. The language varied. Personality conflict, misunderstanding, insufficient evidence, matter resolved privately. But the pattern was unmistakable. Kane was untouchable, protected by seniority, by his union, by a management structure that valued the illusion of harmony over the reality of justice. Maya found an email thread from April 2024, buried in a folder marked Leadership Development. Kane had written to the chief pilot complaining about the airline's new diversity hiring initiative. First class is meant for people who earned the right to be there, he'd written. Not diversity hires who got a seat because of quotas. We're diluting our brand, making our premium cabins feel like a Greyhound bus. Standards matter, heritage matters. The chief pilot had responded, Understand your concerns, Victor. Let's discuss offline. Meanwhile, keep up the excellent work. Your commitment to excellence is what makes this airline great. Maya screenshot the exchange, forwarded it to her legal team with a single word, evidence. She pulled up the scheduling system next, cross-referencing Kane's flight assignments with passenger complaint data. A pattern emerged like stars forming constellations. On routes Kane regularly flew, complaints about discriminatory treatment from passengers of color were 300% higher than the airline average. Complaints about inappropriate crew behavior toward female passengers were 250% higher. But here was the genius of systematic bigotry. The complaints never mentioned Kane by name. They were filed against the flight crew or airline staff or personnel. The individual incidents were small enough to dismiss. Only when aggregated did the pattern become undeniable, and nobody had ever aggregated the data. Nobody except Maya, sitting in seat 42B with her knees jammed against a broken tray table and her heart full of methodical rage. The intercom crackled. Kane's voice filled the cabin, smooth and authoritative, the voice of a man who'd given thousands of announcements and believed every word of his own authority. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Kane from the flight deck. We apologize for the delay. We had to address a seating discrepancy to ensure the comfort of our premium guests. We'll be pushing back shortly. Flight time to London Heathrow is 6 hours and 48 minutes. We're expecting smooth conditions. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight. Seating discrepancy. Code language. Everyone in first class would understand. They'd removed someone who didn't belong, restored order, protected the sanctity of their premium experience. Maya closed her eyes, counted to 10, thought about her father's funeral, about the way his fellow pilots had stood in their dress uniforms and said empty words about a good man and a fine aviator, while never once acknowledging why he'd died, while never once admitting that their silence in the face of discrimination had put the rope in his hands. The airplane began to push back. Through the window, Maya watched the terminal recede, watched JFK's tarmac lights blur into rivers of amber. Somewhere up front, a champagne cork popped. Someone laughed. The sounds of first class drifted back through the cabin like music from a party she'd been uninvited from. Her phone buzzed. A text from David Park. Legal team confirms documentation started. We're tracking everything. Just give the word. Maya typed back. Not yet. Let me see how deep this goes. The 777's engines spooled up. A rising howl that Maya felt in her bones. The airplane accelerated down runway 31L, the physics of flight overcoming the physics of prejudice, lifting 250 tons of metal and humanity into the air through principles that didn't care about the color of anyone's skin or the contents of their bank account. Maya opened a new document on her laptop, started typing. Not a legal brief, not a termination letter, a chronicle. A record of every moment, every microaggression, every assumption that had led to this seat, this humiliation, this perfectly calibrated cruelty. She would document it all, and then she would burn it all down. At 35,000 feet, while Maya worked in the sweltering rear cabin, a very different scene unfolded in first class. Brandon Pierce Hartwell stumbled aboard during the final boarding call. His Armani suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, his breath reeking of vodka he'd consumed in the Centurion Lounge. 24 years old, trust fund baby, senator's son, he moved through the world with the careless confidence of someone who'd never faced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. Captain Kane personally greeted him at the aircraft door, actually left the cockpit, another protocol violation, to shake Brandon's hand, like they were old fraternity brothers reuniting. Mr. Hartwell, welcome aboard. Your father sends his regards. Brandon waved a hand dismissively, nearly hitting Vanessa in the face. Yeah, where's my fucking seat? Kane guided him to 1A, Maya's seat, the chairman's seat, and gestured like a maitre d' seating royalty. Right this way. We had to clear an obstruction, but everything's ready for you now. Brandon collapsed into the pod, kicked off his loafers, and planted his socked feet on the pristine white bulkhead, leaving dark smudges on leather that cost more per square inch than most people's car payments. He grabbed the champagne Vanessa had poured, drained it in 3 gulps, and thrust the empty flute back at her without looking. Keep 'em coming. And get me the beef Wellington, medium rare. Vanessa's smile was plastic stretched too thin. Of course, Mr. Hartwell. We'll have that prepared shortly. She retreated to the galley. Kane followed, his voice low but audible to the actress in 1F who'd started surreptitiously recording on her phone. Make sure he gets whatever he wants. His father sits on the transportation committee. We need friends in Washington. Vanessa nodded, but her eyes said something else. Something that looked like resentment or fear or the particular exhaustion that came from enabling bad behavior because your mortgage depended on it. The 777 climbed through 40,000 feet, found its cruising altitude, and settled into the monotonous hum of long-haul flight. In economy, Maya continued her excavation of Sky Vanguard's institutional rot. In first class, Brandon Hartwell consumed his 4th glass of Dom Perignon and began the descent from drunk to belligerent that would change everything. But that was still 90 minutes away. For now, Maya worked in silence, her fingers dancing across the keyboard, building the case that would end careers, destroy reputations, and transform an entire industry. She thought about her father, about justice delayed, about karma that arrived not by accident, but by careful, deliberate, methodical design. Outside the window, the Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly below, dark and cold and deep enough to swallow all the world's secrets. But this secret, this reckoning, would not be swallowed, would not be silenced, would not be dismissed as a personality conflict or misunderstanding or matter resolved privately. This secret had teeth, and Maya was about to let it feed. 2 hours into the flight, the temperature in the rear cabin had climbed to 87 degrees. Maya's hoodie clung to her skin, damp with sweat that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with an air conditioning system the airline had clearly neglected in favor of maintaining the Arctic chill up front where paying customers, real paying customers in management's eyes, expected Arctic luxury. She'd compiled 43 pages of documentation, personnel files, email threads, complaint histories, financial records showing how Sky Vanguard systematically allocated maintenance budgets to favor premium cabins while letting economy infrastructure decay. The picture was comprehensive, damning, and about to get worse. Thomas Henderson had fallen asleep, his head lolling against the window, mouth open, the tuna sandwich wrapper crumpled in his lap. Aisha struggled with Malachi, trying to breastfeed while maintaining some semblance of privacy in a space designed by people who'd apparently never considered that mothers might need to feed their children. Maya offered her hoodie as a privacy screen. Aisha took it with grateful eyes. "Thank you. Most people just glare like it's my fault he's hungry. Most people are idiots." Aisha laughed, a sound that seemed impossible given the circumstances. "You headed to London for work?" Maya considered the question. "Something like that. Restructuring project. Sounds important." "It will be." The intercom crackled. Not Kane's voice this time, but the first officer, a man Maya's research identified as Isaiah Morehouse, 32 years old, former Navy pilot, black, with a personnel file that showed competence rewarded with indifference and talent systematically overlooked for promotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The airplane shuddered, a subtle vibration that sent ripples through the cabin like a stone dropped in still water. Maya's laptop screen flickered. She saved her work compulsively, backed it up to 3 separate cloud servers, and sent encrypted copies to David Park with a message. "If anything happens to me, publish everything." His response was immediate. "Nothing's going to happen." But copies secured. The turbulence intensified, not dangerous. Maya had enough experience to know the difference between uncomfortable and unsafe, but enough to make passengers grip armrests and exchange nervous glances. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Flight attendants hurried through the aisles, checking compliance, their faces wearing the carefully neutral expressions of people who'd trained to project calm while privately calculating emergency procedures. Up front, in the insulated luxury of first class, Brandon Hartwell was on his 4th glass of champagne and descending into the particular ugliness that alcohol revealed in people who'd spent their lives having their worst impulses enabled. Maya couldn't see him from 42B, but she could hear the commotion filtering back through the cabin, could feel the tension radiating from the flight attendants who kept getting summoned forward. Chloe Reyes Martinez, the young purser Maya had noted during boarding, rushed past row 42 carrying a tray. Her uniform was pristine, but her hands trembled slightly, the champagne flutes clinking against each other with each step. She disappeared behind the curtain separating classes, and Maya heard raised voices. "I said medium rare. Does this look fucking medium rare to you?" Brandon's voice, slurred and aggressive, carried through the cabin like a smoke alarm nobody could silence. Chloe's response was quieter, professional, strained. "Sir, I apologize. The galley ovens are difficult to control at altitude. I can have the chef prepare another." "I don't want another. I want this one cooked right. What kind of shit airline is this?" Maya's fingers stilled on her keyboard. She pulled up the real-time crew communication system, another administrative access she'd gained during acquisition, and watched the internal chat messages scroll past. Vanessa_W. Brandon Hartwell is intoxicated. Should we cut him off? Kane_V. Absolutely not. His father is Senator Hartwell. Keep him happy. Chloe_RM. He's becoming aggressive. Threw his napkin at me. Kane_V. So give him extra napkins. He's a VIP. Deal with it. Isaiah_M. Captain FAA Reg 121.575 requires we stop alcohol service to intoxicated passengers. Kane_V. I'm aware of the regulations, Morehouse. I'm also aware of who signs our paychecks. Stand down. Maya screenshot the exchange, added it to her evidence file. Felt something cold and precise crystallize in her chest. Not anger, which was hot and reactive, but something far more dangerous. Certainty. The airplane hit another pocket of rough air, dropped 20 feet in a sickening lurch that sent unsecured items flying. A carry-on bag tumbled from an overhead compartment 3 rows up, narrowly missing a teenager's head. Passengers gasped. A child started crying. In the cockpit, Isaiah Morehouse made the decision Kane should have made 10 minutes earlier. His voice came over the PA system, calm and authoritative in a way that suggested military training and natural leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering some moderate clear air turbulence. Flight attendants, please take your seats immediately. Passengers, remain seated with seatbelts fastened. The airplane shuddered again, harder this time. Maya gripped her armrests, not from fear but from the physical necessity of staying in her seat. Next to her, Henderson woke with a snort. Rough patch, huh? Seems like it. I've flown hundreds of times, never gets less weird, does it? Sitting in a metal tube 7 miles up, trusting strangers with your life. Maya thought about her father, about the last time she'd trusted an airline with anything that mattered. No, it never does. The turbulence passed after 10 minutes that felt like an hour. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Flight attendants emerged from their jump seats and resumed service, moving through economy with water cups and apologetic smiles while first class got its champagne refreshed and its egos soothed. Chloe appeared again, this time carrying a covered tray toward first class. Maya watched her disappear behind the curtain, heard the exchange that followed. Your beef Wellington, Mr. Hartwell, prepared exactly to your specifications this time. About fucking time. Jesus, you people are useless. A pause, then the sound of porcelain hitting metal, a crash that made passengers in business class turn their heads. I said, well done. Are you deaf? Are you stupid? Maya was moving before conscious thought caught up with instinct. She unbuckled, stood, started toward the front of the cabin. Aisha looked up from nursing Malachi. Where are you going? Someone needs help. And a flight attendant, Jessica, according to her name tag, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and the posture of someone who'd spent 3 decades bending over to serve people who rarely said thank you. Intercepted Maya at the curtain separating economy from premium. Ma'am, you need to return to your seat. First class is restricted. Maya met her eyes, saw fear there, and exhaustion, and the particular resignation of someone who knew exactly what was happening up front, but lacked the power or courage to intervene. I heard someone scream. It's under control. Please return to... A shriek cut through Jessica's platitudes, not a scream of fear, but of pain and shock and violation. The sound of a woman whose professional composure had just shattered under an assault she hadn't seen coming. Maya pushed past Jessica through the curtain into the premium economy section. Passengers stared. A businessman in 12C had his phone out filming. Maya registered his face, evidence, witness, and kept moving. The next curtain into business class, more stairs, more phones, the teenage boy in seat 15C. Jamal, she'd learn later, was already posting to TikTok, his caption reading, "Something crazy happening on this flight for far." Maya reached the final barrier, the heavy velvet curtain that separated the peasants from the privileged, and yanked it aside. The scene in first class was chaos frozen in amber. Brandon Hartwell stood, swayed really, in the aisle, his suit jacket off, shirt untucked, face flushed the particular crimson of wealthy rage. Beef Wellington and au jus sauce decorated the galley floor, the cream-colored carpet, and Chloe Reyes Martinez's uniform. The young woman stood with her back against the galley wall, one hand clutching her chest where the hot sauce had soaked through her blouse, the other covering her mouth as if she could physically trap the Sioux trying to escape. Captain Kane stood between them, but facing Chloe, not Brandon. His body language was all wrong, protective of the drunk aggressor, blocking the victim from retreat. "Chloe, get to the galley and clean yourself up. You're making a scene." His voice carried the particular disappointment of someone addressing an employee who'd failed to properly absorb abuse. Brandon jabbed a finger toward Chloe, nearly losing his balance. "She ruined my meal, brought me this garbage when I specifically—" Maya's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "Is she okay?" Everyone turned. Kane's face cycled through surprise, recognition, and fury in the space of a heartbeat. "I told you to stay in your seat." Maya ignored him, walked directly to Chloe, positioned herself between the young woman and both men. Up close, she could see the red welt forming on Chloe's neck, where the hot sauce had burned skin, could see her hands shaking, could see the tears she was desperately trying not to shed because crying in front of passengers meant weakness, and weakness meant complaints, and complaints meant unemployment. "Kobe Thung Kong." The question, "Are you hurt?" came out in Maya's mother's Vietnamese, the language she defaulted to in moments of protective instinct. Chloe didn't understand the words but understood the tone. She nodded, unable to speak. Brandon lurched toward them. "Who the fuck is this? The cleaning crew coming to mop up?" The actress in 1F had her phone out now, recording. The hedge fund manager in 2A had abandoned all pretense of work. Everyone was watching, and Maya felt the weight of their attention like stage lights. She turned to face Brandon, and something in her expression made him stop mid-step. "Sit down, Mr. Hartwell, before you commit a felony." Brandon laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Felony? Do you know who I am? I'm Brandon Pierce Hartwell. My father is Senator William Hartwell. I could buy you. I could buy your whole fucking family." He reached out to shove Maya's shoulder, a gesture of casual violence that assumed no consequences. It was a mistake. Maya had earned her black belt in Krav Maga over 5 years of twice-weekly training that started as stress relief and evolved into something deeper, a physical manifestation of her need to never again feel powerless. When Brandon's hand came toward her, muscle memory took over. She didn't strike him, didn't need to, just deflected his arm with a sharp block that redirected his momentum, stepped aside, and let physics do the rest. Brandon stumbled, tripped over his own expensive shoes, and collapsed into seat 1A with a graceless thump that would have been comical if the situation weren't so ugly. Kane erupted. "That's assault! Air marshals to first class, code red!" His hand went to the intercom panel, jabbed the emergency call button 3 times in rapid succession. Somewhere in the cabin, 2 federal air marshals who'd been sitting quietly in economy received the alert and started forward. Maya stood perfectly still, hands visible, posture non-threatening. She'd done nothing wrong. Technically, legally, she'd defended herself against an assault. But she knew how this would look, knew how this would play. A black woman in a hoodie versus a drunk white senator's son in first class. The optics were a weapon Kane would wield without hesitation. The air marshals arrived within 30 seconds. Dominic Castellano, 45, ex-NYPD, stocky build, The kind of cop who'd probably been good at his job before cynicism and institutional bias had calcified into his bones. Brett Hargrove, 38, ex-Marine, tall, buzz-cut, the rigid posture of someone who'd spent a career following orders and had long since stopped questioning whether those orders were just. Kane pointed at Maya like a prosecutor identifying the accused. "She assaulted Mr. Hartwell! Restrain her immediately." Castellano's hand went to the zip ties on his belt. "Ma'am, hands where I can see them." Maya raised her hands slowly, palms out, fingers spread. "I didn't touch him. He fell. I'll return to my seat voluntarily." Hargrove moved behind her, voice flat and brooking no argument. "Turn around, hands behind your back. This is unnecessary. I'm complying. Now!" The word was a hammer. Maya turned, felt Hargrove's hands grab her wrists, pull them together with more force than was needed, the professional restraint technique that existed in the space between proper procedure and excessive force. The zip tie cinched down, plastic teeth biting into skin. "Too tight. You're cutting off circulation." Hargrove's response was tired, scripted, the words of a man who'd said them 1,000 times and stopped hearing their meaning. "You should have thought about that before you assaulted a passenger." Pain bloomed in Maya's wrists, sharp and immediate. The plastic cut into skin, compressed blood vessels, sent her fingers tingling into numbness. She'd studied the mechanics of zip-tie restraints, knew they were designed for temporary detention, knew that prolonged application could cause nerve damage, knew that Hargrove knew this too and didn't care. Castellano pushed down on her shoulders. "Sit." Maya's knees buckled, more from the sudden pressure than voluntary compliance. Her kneecap cracked against the armrest of seat 2A, fiberglass and metal meeting bone with a sound that made the hedge fund manager wince. White-hot pain exploded through her leg. She tasted copper, realized she'd bitten her tongue on impact. Blood dripped onto the beige carpet, perfect crimson drops that would stain and bear witness. The hedge fund manager found his voice, tentative but present. "Jesus Christ, is that necessary?" Castellano's response was sharp. "Sir, stay out of this." They hauled Maya upright, each marshal gripping an arm, and began the long walk toward the rear of the plane. The walk that would become legend, would go viral, would transform from a moment of cruelty into a catalyst for revolution. First class was a gauntlet of stairs. The actress filmed openly now, tears streaming down her face, her whispered, "Oh my God, oh my God," providing audio commentary to footage that would be viewed 8 million times in the next 48 hours. The elderly couple in 2C clutched each other's hands, looking away as if averting their eyes might absolve them of complicity. Brandon slumped in 1A, drunk enough to have already forgotten the confrontation, scrolling through his phone while a woman bled 15 feet away. Business class was worse. Families pulled their children close, as if violence might be contagious. Fathers who would later claim they'd wanted to intervene but hadn't. Mothers who would tell themselves they'd been protecting their kids by staying slinted. Executives who would rationalize that it wasn't their business, wasn't their responsibility, wasn't their problem. The businessman in seat 8C did stand up, his voice carrying more courage than his body language suggested. "Officers, this seems excessive." Hargrove didn't break stride. "Sit down unless you want to join her." The man sat. Later he would write a letter to the CEO, would post about it on LinkedIn, would position himself as an ally who'd spoken truth to power. But in the moment when it mattered, he sat. Premium economy was the same story repeated with slightly cheaper seats. Witnesses who would remember but hadn't acted. Bystanders who would claim they'd been shocked, horrified, disgusted, but who in the moment had done exactly nothing. The teenager in 15C, Jamal Washington, was different. He filmed with shaking hands, his face reflecting the particular horror of watching someone who looked like his mother being brutalized by people who looked like every cop who'd ever stopped him for driving while black. His caption was simple: pilot having woman dragged bloody. He posted it at 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time. By noon, it had 10,000 views. By the time the plane landed, it would have over 1 million. Economy was where the mask slipped completely. No pretense of decorum, no expensive suits to hide behind. Just 200 people watching a woman bleed and doing nothing because intervening meant risking their own safety. Their own seats on a plane that was already in the air and couldn't turn back. Henderson stood when he saw Maya, his face going pale with recognition and rage. "Officers, please, she didn't do anything." Castellano's voice was a whip crack. "Sir, final warning, sit down." Henderson sat, looked at Maya with eyes that said, "I'm sorry," in the only language available to the powerless. Mouthed the words. Maya saw them, registered them, filed them away in the part of her brain that was still cataloging evidence while the rest of her consciousness focused on managing pain. The blood trail followed them through the cabin. Drops from her split lip, smears from her abraded wrists where the zip tie had cut deep enough to weep. A constellation of evidence that cleaners would scrub from the carpet but that cameras had already immortalized. They reached the rear galley and shoved her onto a crew jump seat. The small fold-down chair hit the backs of her knees, forced her to sit with her hands still bound behind her, shoulders wrenched at an angle that would cause muscle damage if maintained for more than an hour. Hargrove loomed over her. "You move, you talk. I add federal charges, understand?" Maya met his eyes, held them, let him see that she wasn't afraid, wasn't broken, wasn't going to cry or beg or give him the satisfaction of believing his authority was legitimate. She didn't answer. Silence was its own form of resistance. Castellano slammed the galley door. The sound echoed through the cabin like a coffin closing. Maya was alone in a space barely larger than a closet, hands numb, knee throbbing, lip bleeding, and absolutely, perfectly, completely in control. She took inventory. Wrists, zip tie embedded approximately 2 millimeters into skin, blood flow restricted but not completely cut off. Nerve damage possible but not certain. Knee, probable contusion. Possible hairline fracture, definitely painful but functional. Lip, split but shallow, bleeding already slowing. Overall assessment: she would survive, would heal, would testify. The galley had a small mirror mounted above the sink. Maya caught her reflection. Face streaked with blood, hoodie stained, eyes hard as polished obsidian. She looked like a victim. But victims didn't own airlines. Victims didn't have teams of lawyers on speed dial. Victims didn't have the power to ground an entire fleet with a single phone call. The phone. Her phone was still in her hoodie pocket. Hands bound behind her back, she couldn't reach it. But Chloe could. Maya waited, listened, heard the flight attendants conferring in hushed voices just outside the galley door. Heard Vanessa's voice, brittle with anxiety. "Captain says nobody talks to her, nobody goes in there, she's dangerous." Heard Chloe's response, quieter, shaking. "She helped me. She tried to protect me and they... Oh God, there's so much blood." "Chloe, you can't. You'll lose your job. Kane will make sure of it." A long pause, then footsteps. The galley door opened. Chloe slipped inside, her uniform still stained with eau jus, her eyes red from crying. She looked at Maya and something broke in her expression. Guilt or horror or the dawning realization that she'd been complicit in a system that would sacrifice anyone to protect the comfort of the privileged. "I'm so sorry. I'll get you ice, water, bandages, Maya's voice was calm, almost gentle. "I need you to do something for me. My phone is in my right pocket. I need to make a call." Chloe's eyes widened. "Captain said, if you don't let me make this call, 2,800 Sky Vanguard employees will be unemployed by Wednesday." The specificity of the number, the precision of it, cut through Chloe's fear. What? Please. Chloe hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, then reached into Maya's pocket, pulled out the phone. The screen was cracked, had broken when Castellano slammed her into the armrest, but still functional. Face ID unlocked it despite the blood smeared across Maya's features. Who do you want to call? David Park, speed dial number 2. Chloe found the contact, hit call, put the phone on speaker and held it near Maya's face. The connection went through instantly despite being 39,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, because Maya paid for the premium satellite service that most people didn't even know existed. David answered on the first ring. Maya, where are you? His voice carried the carefully controlled panic of someone who'd been watching location data and social media feeds and knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. Maya's words came out measured, each syllable precisely enunciated despite the blood in her mouth. David, code red, execute now. A sharp intake of breath. What happened? Ground every Sky Vanguard aircraft, globally, immediately. That's 340 planes currently airborne, will cause chaos. The FAA will... I own the FAA's cooperation for the next 6 hours. Make the call. Get Administrator Yates on the line. Get Metropolitan Police at Heathrow. Get every C-suite executive we have to meet me at the gate. And David? Yes? Get me a lawyer, multiple lawyers. Criminal assault charges. I want every person who touched me prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law. Silence on the other end. Then, oh God, they don't know who you are, do they? Not yet. They're about to. Maya, are you safe? She looked down at her bound wrists, at the blood drying on her hands, at Chloe's terrified face. Define safe. Just make the calls. I'll handle the rest. Confirmed. Legal team mobilizing now. Maya, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be thorough. I want documentation of everything, every bruise, every cut, every violation of federal law. This ends today. She nodded at Chloe, who ended the call and slipped the phone back into Maya's pocket. The young woman's hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. Who are you? Maya's smile was winter sharp. You're about to find out. And Chloe, when this is over, you're going to write down everything Kane has done to you. Every comment, every threat, every time he made you feel like your job was worth more than your dignity. Can you do that? Chloe nodded, mute with shock. Good. Now get out of here before someone notices you helped me. And Chloe, thank you. The girl fled. Maya was alone again. But the pieces were in motion now. The machinery of justice grinding into gear with the inexorable momentum of avalanche. Somewhere over the Atlantic in Sky Vanguard's operations center in Arlington, Virginia, David Park was placing calls that would reverberate through the aviation industry like seismic shocks. The FAA administrator's personal cell, the chairman's emergency line, the legal team that charged $400 per hour and earned every penny, the public relations firm that specialized in crisis management and corporate transformation. In the cockpit of Flight 902, a radio message crackled through on the emergency frequency. Operations Control, voice tight with barely suppressed panic. Sky Vanguard 902, this is Ops. Immediate return to JFK, Priority Alpha. Isaiah Morehouse, who'd been flying the plane while Kane glad-handed VYPs, keyed the mic. Say again, we're 2 hours from London. All Sky Vanguard flights globally are grounded. FAA order. You are directed to divert to JFK immediately. Captain Kane is relieved of command per owner directive. First Officer Morehouse assumes captain authority. Acknowledge. Isaiah's hand froze on the yoke. Next to him, Kane had gone the color of old paper. Owner directive? What owner? The radio operator's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. The woman you're currently detaining in the rear galley, Captain. Dr. Maya Renee Cross, majority shareholder, your boss. Acknowledge the order. Isaiah looked at Kane, saw understanding dawn on the older pilot's face like sunrise over a battlefield, saw 28 years of assumed authority crumble into dust. Acknowledged. Flight 902 is returning to JFK under First Officer, under Acting Captain Morehouse's command. He initiated the turn, a wide banking arc that would take them back across 2 hours of ocean. In the cabin, passengers felt the change in direction, checked their phones, started to panic. Social media lit up with speculation. Engine failure, bomb threat, medical emergency. Nobody guessed the truth, that the woman bleeding in the rear galley owned every bolt and rivet holding them in the sky. Kane unbuckled, stumbled out of his seat like a man in a trance. Isaiah called after him, "Captain, where are—" "I need to talk to her. I need to explain. I didn't know. I couldn't have known." He staggered through the cockpit door down the aisle, past the first-class passengers who watched him with the detached interest of people watching a man walk toward his own execution. Reached the rear galley, kicked open the door. Maya looked up from the jump seat, wrists still bound, blood dried brown on her chin, and smiled. Kane's voice cracked. "This is your fault, all of this. You should have just told me." "Told you what, Victor? That I deserved basic human dignity? That my ticket was valid? That assaulting a paying customer is a federal crime regardless of what they look like or what they're wearing? You can't ground a fleet. Do you know what this will cost? The FAA will—" "The FAA works for the American people, and I'm about to become the American people's favorite story. The black woman billionaire assaulted on her own airline by a racist captain and his pet thugs. Do you think Administrator Yates wants to be on the wrong side of that headline?" Kane's knees buckled. He grabbed the galley counter for support. "I have a family. I have a mortgage. You have nothing. You had a career, had a reputation, had a pension, past tense, all of it. Gone. Please. I'll apologize. I'll make it right. Just don't—" Maya's voice was ice-given sound. "You're about to find out what making it right actually costs, Captain Kane. And I promise you, the price is more than you can afford." The intercom crackled, Isaiah's voice calm despite circumstances that would rattle most pilots. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Acting Captain Morehouse. We're returning to New York due to an operational emergency. Please remain seated. We'll be on the ground in approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes. The cabin erupted in confused murmurs. Phones came out, Twitter filled with speculation. But Jamal's TikTok had already been shared 16,000 times, and the truth was spreading faster than the airplane could fly. Maya sat in the galley, hands still bound, body still in pain, and felt something she hadn't felt since her father died. The absolute certainty that justice, delayed for decades, was finally coming home to roost. Outside the window, the sun was rising over an ocean that looked like hammered silver. A new day, a new world, and Victor Sterling Kane's last flight as a captain of anything. JFK Airport materialized through the cockpit windows like a mirage resolving into concrete reality. Isaiah Morehouse had never executed an emergency return in his 12 years of commercial aviation, but his Navy training held firm. He'd flown F-18s off carrier decks in weather that would ground civilian aircraft, had landed on pitching steel in the middle of the Pacific with fuel gauges kissing empty. A 777 with full tanks and clear skies was comparatively a luxury. The tower had cleared every other aircraft from their approach path. Flight 902 descended through empty airspace like a condemned man walking toward the gallows, alone and watched by everyone. "Sky Vanguard 902, you're cleared for immediate landing runway 31L. Emergency vehicles are standing by." Isaiah keyed the mic. "Negative on emergency vehicles. This isn't a mechanical issue. We have a situation." "Copy that, 902. Be advised you have priority clearance. 8 black vehicles and approximately 40 media personnel are visible on the tarmac near your assigned gate." In the jump seat behind Isaiah, Kane sat with his head in his hands, 4 gold stripes on his shoulders suddenly feeling like shackles. He tried to return to the cockpit after his confrontation with Maya, had found himself physically incapable of sitting in the left seat, the captain's chair, his chair for 28 years. Now it felt like furniture in a stranger's house, the landing gear deployed with a mechanical groan that resonated through the airframe. Isaiah guided the Boeing onto final approach with the steady hands of someone who'd decided that whatever happened after touchdown was someone else's problem. His job was to get 300 souls safely to the ground. The rest, the chaos, the reckoning, the transformation, that belonged to forces he couldn't control and wasn't sure he wanted to. The wheels kissed tarmac at exactly 1:17 p.m. Eastern Time. Reverse thrusters roared. The airplane decelerated with physics-perfect precision. Through the windows, passengers could see the reception committee waiting at gate B7, the same gate they'd departed from 5 hours earlier, though those 5 hours had somehow contained enough time for empires to fall. Maya sat in the rear galley with her wrists still bound, though Chloe had secretly loosened the zip tie after getting permission via text from David Park's legal team. The plastic still cut into damaged tissue, but blood flow had returned enough to prevent permanent nerve damage. Her reflection in the galley mirror showed a woman who looked like she'd survived a war, which, in a sense, she had. The intercom crackled one final time. Isaiah's voice carried a note of finality that felt like the last page of a chapter. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to New York. Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign is turned off. For those continuing to London, Sky Vanguard will provide hotel accommodations and rebook you on the next available flight. We apologize for the inconvenience." Inconvenience. The word was so catastrophically inadequate it achieved a kind of poetry. The jet bridge connected with a pneumatic hiss. Maya heard footsteps in the tunnel. Multiple people moving with purpose. The aircraft door opened and the first person to board wasn't a passenger agent or mechanic. It was Robert Ashford, chairman of the board, 68 years old, silver hair immaculate despite being roused from his Sunday afternoon at 2 hours' notice. He stepped into first class, saw the blood still staining the carpet, and his face went through a transformation that would have been comical if the circumstances weren't so dire. Recognition, horror, calculation, surrender. The actress in 1F was still filming. Her Instagram story had already been viewed by 400,000 people. Robert walked past the premium passengers without acknowledging them, navigated through business class where executives pretended to look at their phones while watching his every move, and finally reached the galley where Maya sat with her hands behind her back and dried blood on her face. He looked at her, at the zip tie, at the bruises already forming on her wrists, at the split lip and the way she held her left leg at an angle that suggested significant knee damage. Then Robert Ashford, chairman of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, member of 3 country clubs and 2 boards of directors, a man who played golf with senators and had a wing of a children's hospital named after him, dropped to his knees on the galley floor. "Miss Cross, I am so deeply..." Maya's hand came up, still bound at the wrist, silencing him with a gesture. "Not now, Robert. We'll discuss your resignation later. Right now, I need you to step aside." She stood, wincing as weight transferred to her injured knee, and walked past him toward the front of the aircraft. Chloe had retrieved Maya's garment bag from the overhead compartment, the one she'd strategically placed there before boarding, the one containing the Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The first-class lavatory was cramped but functional. Maya locked herself inside and began the transformation. Hoodie off, revealing the Cartier watch she'd kept hidden, the $8,000 timepiece now smeared with her own blood. She washed her face carefully, patted dry with paper towels that came away pink, applied makeup from a kit designed for exactly this purpose, covering bruises, minimizing evidence, presenting the mask that power required. The suit went on piece by piece. Black Tom Ford jacket, tailored to her exact measurements. White silk Hermes blouse. The pants that had somehow survived 5 hours of sitting in economy without wrinkling because that's what $6,000 fabric did. Louboutin heels that added 3 inches to her height and transformed her posture from victim to victor. She emerged from the lavatory 7 minutes later, and the first-class cabin went silent. This was not the woman in the hoodie they'd watched being dragged through the aisle. This was not the bleeding victim zip-tied in the galley. This was a CEO. This was power made flesh. This was every nightmare that entitled mediocrity had about competence and consequence showing up dressed for war. Kane stood near the cockpit door, still in his uniform but somehow diminished, as if the 4 stripes on his shoulders had lost their gravitational pull. He stared at Maya with the expression of a man watching his own execution, and finally understanding that the condemned was him. Robert Ashford had composed himself enough to stand, though his hands trembled slightly as he gestured toward the open aircraft door. "Ms. Cross, if you're ready. Captain Kane's badge and epaulets. Now." The words cut through the cabin like a pronouncement from a judge, who'd already written the sentence. Kane's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You can't. I have a contract. The union, I bought the union's contract in the acquisition. Every clause, every protection, every pension obligation. It's all mine now, including the termination provisions. Badge and epaulets, Victor. Don't make me ask again." His hands went to his chest, fingers fumbling with the pin that held his wings. 28 years of authority, of respect earned and assumed, of standing at the front of briefing rooms and being called captain. It all came down to removing a small piece of metal from a shirt. The badge came off. He held it in his palm like a dead thing. Now the stripes. This was worse. The epaulets were sewn onto shoulder slides, meant to be permanent fixtures that signaled rank to every passenger, every flight attendant, every gate agent who saw him walking through an airport. Removing them meant unbuttoning the slides, sliding out the gold-striped fabric, leaving his shoulders bare and his uniform looking like something from a costume shop. Kane's fingers wouldn't cooperate. Robert stepped forward, an act of mercy or pragmatism, and helped unfasten the first slide. The 4 gold stripes came free, then the second shoulder. Kane stood in his white shirt and black pants looking like an imposter, like someone playing dress-up who'd been caught and exposed. "Give them to Robert, I don't touch trash." The chairman accepted the rank insignia with the solemn gravity of someone handling evidence at a crime scene. Kane looked at Maya, really looked, and something broke behind his eyes. "I didn't know. You should have told me." "Told you what? That I deserve to exist in a seat I paid for? That human dignity isn't conditional on net worth or skin color? That your comfort isn't worth more than my safety?" She moved past him toward the aircraft door. The jet bridge beyond was crowded with people. Executives in suits, lawyers with briefcases, David Park looking simultaneously relieved and furious. And 2 Metropolitan Police officers in uniform who stood waiting with the patient professionalism of people who'd been briefed on exactly how serious this situation was. But Maya stopped at the threshold, turned back to face the cabin. Every passenger who could see the front of the aircraft was watching. The actress was still filming. Jamal's TikTok had now been viewed by 2.4 million people and was climbing exponentially. She raised her voice, not shouting but projecting with the clarity of someone who'd spent years giving presentations to rooms full of skeptical investors. "My name is Dr. Maya Renee Cross. I am the owner of Sky Vanguard Airways. 72 hours ago, I completed the acquisition of this company to reform a culture of discrimination that has existed for decades. Today, I experienced that culture firsthand." The cabin was absolutely silent. Not even the ambient hum of ventilation systems intruded. "Captain Victor Kane, Air Marshals Dominic Castellano and Brett Hargrove, and Flight Attendant Vanessa Whitmore are terminated effective immediately." You will face criminal charges for assault, false imprisonment, and violation of federal civil rights law. Brandon Hartwell, you are under arrest." She gestured to the Metropolitan Police officers who moved into the cabin with the synchronized efficiency of people who'd practiced this exact scenario during the 90 minutes it took Flight 902 to return from mid-Atlantic. Brandon, who'd been passed out in Seat 1A for the past hour, woke to handcuffs closing around his wrists with a ratcheting click that sounded like destiny arriving on schedule. "What the fuck? My father is a senator! You can't—" One of the officers, Captain Melissa Torres, veteran of NYPD before transferring to Port Authority, looked at him with the exhausted patience of someone who'd arrested dozens of rich kids who thought their parents' positions were get-out-of-jail-free cards. "Your father resigned from the Transportation Committee 40 minutes ago, Mr. Hartwell. You're under arrest for assault and battery, public intoxication, and interfering with a flight crew. You have the right to remain silent." She continued the Miranda warning while her partner helped Brandon to his feet. He was crying now, mascara of privilege running down his face in streaks of self-pity and dawning consequences. Castellano and Hargrove were next. They'd been sitting in economy, waiting, watching social media explode with videos of their own faces, their own hands on Maya's arms, their own voices telling her to comply as they violated every use of force protocol in the federal handbook. Torres looked at them with particular contempt. "You two should know better. You wore a badge. Turn around." They complied in silence. The handcuffs went on. Their federal credentials were confiscated on the spot. 20-plus years of law enforcement gone in the time it takes to snap metal around wrists. Vanessa Whitmore tried to hide in the rear galley, but there was nowhere to go. A female officer escorted her off the aircraft with her hands cuffed in front, a small mercy that felt like mockery given what she'd enabled. Kane refused the handcuffs initially, stood his ground near the cockpit, some final spark of defiance or delusion making him believe he could negotiate, could explain, could somehow talk his way back to a reality where consequences happen to other people. "I want my union representative. I want a lawyer. I'm not saying anything until—" Maya's voice was winter incarnate. "You had the right to remain silent. You chose to give multiple orders that violated federal law. Every word you said was recorded by the cockpit voice recorder, which my legal team is currently securing as evidence. You can invoke your rights now. They won't help you." Torres moved toward him. Kane finally understood that the walls were closing in, and there was no escape hatch. He put his hands behind his back. The perp walk was a masterpiece of public humiliation. 5 people in handcuffs escorted down the jet bridge while 40 media cameras flashed like lightning, while reporters shouted questions that would never be answered, while the internet watched in real time and passed judgment with the swift brutality of a crowd that had been waiting for exactly this kind of justice. Maya walked behind them, limping slightly on her injured knee but refusing assistance, flanked by David Park and the head of her legal team, a woman named Sarah Chen who charged $800 an hour and was worth every penny. The terminal had been partially cleared, but passengers from other flights lined the windows, pressing against glass to watch. Airport employees had abandoned their posts. TSA agents stood silent, bearing witness. This was history in motion, the kind of moment that would be referenced in business school case studies and discrimination lawsuits for decades. Maya made it halfway through the terminal before the full impact of what her body had endured caught up with her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the flight, through the confrontation, through the transformation suddenly evaporated. Her knee buckled. David caught her before she hit the ground. "Maya, Jesus, you need a hospital." "I need a press conference. Medical attention comes after I make sure every news outlet on the planet has this story. You're bleeding through your jacket. Your knee is the size of a grapefruit. You need—" "What I need is for this to matter. For my father's death to finally mean something. Get me to the press room. I'll go to the hospital after. Sarah Chen pulled out her phone, already coordinating. We've got Mount Sinai on standby. Trauma team, private suite, complete documentation of all injuries for the criminal case. But Maya, David's right. You're about to collapse. Then I'll collapse on camera. That's even better optics. She straightened, put weight on the damaged knee, and kept walking. Behind her, the 5 accused were being loaded into separate police vehicles, each one photographed from 16 angles by media that smelled blood in the water and were feeding with the frenzy of sharks. The Sky Vanguard executive conference room had been converted into a makeshift press center. 30 reporters, 12 cameras, enough recording equipment to capture every breath and pause and moment of controlled rage that Maya was about to unleash. She walked to the podium without notes. The suit jacket did indeed have blood seeping through. Her wrist wounds had reopened during the terminal walk, but she'd refused to change. The visual was perfect. Powerful woman in expensive suit, bleeding, standing, speaking. The room fell silent. My name is Dr. Maya Renee Cross. 3 days ago, I purchased Sky Vanguard Airways for $2.4 billion. This morning, I boarded Flight 902 as an anonymous passenger to audit the company's operations firsthand. What I experienced was a systematic failure of human decency that has been allowed to fester for decades. She detailed everything. The microaggressions at check-in, Kane's assumptions, the forced relocation, Brandon's assault on Chloe, her own intervention, the excessive force, the blood trail, the humiliation. This is not an isolated incident. In the past 8 years, 73 passengers of color have been forcibly removed from first-class seats they legitimately purchased. 41 of those removals involved physical force. 19 resulted in arrests that were later dismissed because the passengers had done nothing wrong. Every single complaint was dismissed by management as a misunderstanding or personality conflict. A reporter from the Washington Post raised her hand. Maya nodded. Ms. Cross, what happens now? Now we rebuild. Every executive who enabled this culture will be terminated. Every policy that allowed discrimination will be rewritten. Every victim who was silenced will be compensated. And every person who assaulted me on that airplane will face the full weight of federal criminal prosecution. What about the financial impact? Your stock has fallen 40% since this news broke. Maya's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Good. Let it fall. Let every investor who values profit over human dignity sell their shares. I'll buy them back at a discount and build something worth owning. Money comes back. Reputation once destroyed never fully recovers. I'd rather have a company worth believing in than one worth $1 billion to people with no conscience. The press conference lasted 18 minutes. By the time Maya walked off the podium, the video had been clipped into 30-second segments that were circulating on every social media platform. The full transcript was being read into the congressional record by representatives who saw an opportunity to position themselves on the right side of history. Senator William Hartwell, Brandon's father, was watching from his office in Washington. He'd already drafted his resignation letter from the Transportation Committee. His chief of staff was fielding calls from reporters asking for comment. His wife had filed separation papers an hour earlier. Everything he'd built over 30 years in politics was collapsing because his son couldn't keep his hands to himself and his privilege had finally written a check his father couldn't cash. Maya finally agreed to go to the hospital when her vision started tunneling at the edges. Mount Sinai had prepared a trauma suite typically reserved for VIPs and witnesses in federal protection. The examination took 3 hours. The medical report would become Exhibit A in the criminal case. Bilateral wrist abrasions consistent with tight ligature restraints. Contusion to left patellar region with possible microfracture. Laceration to lower lip requiring 3 internal sutures. Soft tissue damage to both shoulders from hyperextension. Estimated healing time, 4 to 6 weeks. Permanent scarring, likely. The doctor who treated her, Dr. James Mitchell, 45, cardiac surgeon, black, had steady hands but eyes that kept returning to her face with something beyond professional concern. Ms. Cross, I need to ask, this injury pattern is consistent with... Have you considered filing charges beyond what's already public? Every charge that can be filed will be filed. Why? Mitchell's jaw tightened. Because 6 years ago I was on a Sky Vanguard flight to Vienna, medical conference. I'd paid for first class. The captain decided I didn't belong there, moved me to economy. I missed my keynote speech, lost $75,000 in speaking fees, filed a complaint, got a $500 voucher and a non-disclosure agreement. Maya sat up despite the pain medication making her head swim. You signed the NDA? I did, because I needed to keep flying for my work, because fighting seemed impossible, because they had lawyers and I had medical school debt. Not anymore. That NDA is void as of now. I'm opening a victims' compensation fund, $75 million to start. Every person who was discriminated against by this airline will be contacted, compensated, and given the opportunity to testify. Are you willing? Mitchell's hands were shaking. He nodded, unable to speak. Good. My legal team will contact you tomorrow. And Dr. Mitchell, thank you for not becoming too cynical to care when someone else was bleeding. She left the hospital at 11 p.m., 12 hours after boarding a plane that morning. The media was still camped outside, but hospital security had cleared a path. David Park had arranged a car. Maya's apartment was in Tribeca, 45 minutes away in Sunday night traffic. She made it to her living room before her phone started ringing with calls she couldn't ignore. The first was from the FAA administrator. Ms. Cross, we need to discuss the grounding order. You can't keep 340 aircraft on the ground indefinitely. Watch me. Every plane stays grounded until every pilot completes mandatory bias training. Every air marshal is retrained on use of force protocols. Every complaint from the past decade is reviewed by an independent board. This airline doesn't fly again until I'm convinced it won't hurt anyone else. That could take weeks, months. The economic impact is less important than the human impact. My planes, my decision. If you want to override me, take it to federal court. I'll see you there. She hung up. The next call was from her mother in California, who'd seen the news and was crying too hard to form complete sentences. Ma, I'm okay, I promise. Just some bruises. Your father would be so proud, so angry but so proud. Maya felt her own tears start then, hot and unexpected and long overdue. I wish he was here to see it. He is, Kongai. He's watching, and he finally has peace. The third call was from Robert Ashford, whose resignation she'd accepted via text message 2 hours earlier. Maya, I know you don't want to hear from me, but there's something you need to know before tomorrow. The board is meeting at 6 a.m. They're going to try to remove you. On what grounds? I own 78% of voting shares. Emergency provision in the corporate bylaws. If a majority shareholder's actions cause catastrophic financial harm, the board can petition for temporary removal pending arbitration. The stock crashed 43% today. They'll argue you're destroying shareholder value. Maya laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Let them try. I'll see them in court. And Robert, thank you for the warning. It doesn't absolve you, but it's noted. She hung up and looked around her apartment, the home she'd bought with money she'd made by being better, smarter, and more ruthless than every man who'd underestimated her. The walls were covered with art she'd collected from black artists, Vietnamese artists, anyone the mainstream galleries had overlooked. Her father's pilot wings sat in a frame above the fireplace. Tomorrow the board would try to take her company. The week after, criminal trials would begin. The month after that, federal investigations. The year after that, industry-wide reform. But tonight, Maya Renee Cross sat in her living room with a glass of bourbon and her father's photograph and finally allowed herself to believe that justice, however delayed, however imperfect, was possible if you were willing to bleed for it. The phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. "Ms. Cross, this is Chloe. Thank you for what you did. I wrote everything down. Every comment Captain Kane made, every time he touched me inappropriately. Every threat. It's 17 pages. My lawyer says it's enough to end him. Thank you for making me brave enough to speak." Maya typed back, "You were always brave. You just needed someone to believe you. See you in court." She set down the phone, closed her eyes, and for the first time in 27 years, since the summer day she'd found her father hanging in his bedroom, Maya Cross allowed herself to sleep without nightmares, because the reckoning had only just begun, and she would need her strength for what came next.